A new report outlines the president's relationship with AG Garland may now be in a deep freeze as investigations into Hunter Biden heat up.
Okay, that's what they say. The Wall Street Journal writing, quote, some Biden aides have said they see Garland's handling of the inquiries into the Biden family as driven less by a passionate pursuit of justice than by a punctilious, it's a very Wall Street Journal word, desire to give the appearance that sensitive investigations are walled off from political pressure. People familiar with the matter say.
So here with the reaction, Life, Liberty, and Levin host, the great one, Mark Levin. Mark, always good to have you on the program. Good morning to you. What do you think, Mark? What is the purpose of this charge against Hunter Biden?
Well, first of all, I think that story is BS. That's number one. Just remember what they tell us, that the two never speak about anything. Now you have aides trying to spin to put pressure on Garland. There's no freeze between the two. I mean, Garland has been the greatest mob attorney that the mob family could ever hope for. And what they're doing to Trump, they have two tracks. Take out the leading Republican potential nominee, which they're doing as aggressively as they possibly can with a filing on Friday to try and, believe it or not, tell a presidential candidate he's not to talk about the case against him. I mean, if this isn't fascism, I don't know what is. And then on the other hand, his son, we've seen all this. We've covered it here ad nauseum about the deal. Judge had to step in, and now we get this phony story that there's some kind of relationship problem between the Attorney General and Biden. What exactly would that be? And why would it be? So what? He's been charged on gun charges. It still protects Joe Biden, as I said here 3 weeks ago on Hannity, that is a ruse, and everybody else knows it's a ruse. We've had charges that have run the statute of limitations because there's been no tolling whatsoever, couldn't even get an agreement. So this is propaganda, and people need to understand that the vast majority of the media in this country exist to serve the interests of the Democrat Party, that the Democrat Party monopolizes the media, monopolizes these different agencies and departments of the federal government, and unfortunately now monopolizes so-called justice in this country. So this is all nonsense.
Absolutely. You mentioned the interest of the Democrat Party, Mark, and what they think makes the most sense, because their whole thing is about stopping and beating Trump, whether they can do it in the courtroom or they can do it at the ballot box. That's their attempt. What if they decide Joe Biden isn't the guy? Do you think they would do you believe before 2024 they have a path to do that? Do you think they will do that? I mean, this is a party ruthless in its willingness and attempts to win. Is Joe Biden the guy? And if not, how do they change it?
Well, you know, Pete, here again, we got this guy, David Ignatius, who outside of a 50-mile radius of Washington, D.C., nobody's ever heard of him. Nobody cares about him. They can't spell his name. They don't know what he looks like. So this is a Washington Post-centric story, and everybody inside the Beltway and New York gets all worked up about it. Obviously, it's a plant because the guy's a stenographer for the Democrat Party. Let me make this simple so everybody can understand this. If Joe Biden wants to run for president, nobody can stop him, period. He owns the DNC. They changed the voting lineup of the different states. There's not another Democrat in the wings who has the guts to take him on other than Robert F. Kennedy Jr. You see what they're doing to him. They won't even give him Secret Service protection, even though he had a threat the other day, which is sickening, which is absolutely shocking. So Joe Biden will be the nominee as long as he wants to be the nominee. That's the beginning and the end of it, regardless of what some columnist for the Washington Post has to say. I know I'm supposed to go on and on about it. I don't mean here, but for the next 7 weeks. But that's the bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Mark, there's also been a lot of discussion in Washington, D.C. Somebody says something that gets picked up, and then it becomes the main focus of conversation about what if Joe Biden ends up, becoming the nominee again, possibly winning again, and then pardoning Hunter Biden. Could you see something like that actually happening?
I absolutely can, and then the media will be in full force explaining that he loves his son and what people expect him to do, and on and on and on. And who's going to stop him? Who's going to stop him? You have members of the House who want an impeachment inquiry, and immediately you have the vast majority of Republican senators, led by Mitch McConnell, which is really outrageous, saying this is a bad idea, it's going to divert attention, we need to work on the economy. Well, boys, let me tell you something. You've been working on the economy and you've all but destroyed it. And that includes the Republicans who voted for $1 trillion in extra spending so Biden can run around and say some of these bills were bipartisan. How exactly is Congress going to fix the economy? Unless they get the hell out of our way, reduce regulations, stop beating up on the American people in the private sector, they can't fix the economy. So if they're distracted by impeachment, which is their job under the Constitution, rather than destroying our energy sector, rather than their inability to secure the border, I mean, this drives me nuts. Congress has a lot on its plate. The federal government can't grab enough power. At least show some level of competency, some level of urgency about what's happening to the American people. As far as distracted and with Joe Biden, would he pardon his son? Of course he would pardon his son. Now, first of all, let's understand how this works. Let's say he's convicted after a trial at some point. Motions are filed. He's got Abby Lowell's a good lawyer. They're going to raise constitutional issues. They're going to say they already had a deal. That takes time. But let's say after all that, however long it takes, he's convicted. So what do you get to do? You go to the judge and you say, okay, they're sentencing. Can you stay his imprisonment until we run it up the ladder to the appellate court? None of this is going to be resolved until after the election, until we have another president, God willing. So it will not interfere, that is, a pardon, with the election, because Abby Lowell and the Biden people are not going to allow it to interfere with an election. So if there's an issue of a pardon, he's not going to pardon his son before the election. If he pardons his son, it'll be after the election. He's going to say, now what the hell are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Nothing.
He'd have the power.
Well, you can see it over his right shoulder. Mark has a new book out, The Democrat Party Hates America. Stick around, because the great one's going to come back with us right after this commercial break, and we're going to talk about The Democrat Party Hates America.
We are back with the great one, Life, Liberty, and Levin host Mark Levin, who has a new book coming out this week called The Democrat Party Hates America. Mark, tell us about the book.
Well, I can tell you a little bit about the book. It's a very extensive and I think the most comprehensive and brutal takedown of the Democrat Party in modern history. And I say that not just as the author, but as people read it, they will see. It is a mixture of history of the party. It's a mixture of ideology, of current events, and it covers a wide range of issues. The Democrat Party, the bottom line is, has never accepted this country. It is the party of Confederacy. It is the party of slavery. People need to understand that when we fought the Civil War, we were also fighting the Democrat Party. It's the party of segregation all the way into the 1960s. It's the party that supported eugenics to include black people. It's the party that resegregated the military, resegregated the federal bureaucracy after the Republicans had desegregated it. It's the party of lynching. In 1940, FDR was presented with a bipartisan bill to federally outlaw lynching. He refused to sign it. He refused to meet with Jesse Owens after the 1936 Olympics, after meeting with all the white individuals who were at the Olympics. He would not meet with the NAACP. He largely removed black reporters from his press conferences. He never lifted a finger for the black community. Woodrow Wilson was even worse. Woodrow Wilson, as president of Princeton, was very proud of the fact that there wasn't a single black student admitted into Princeton when he was president there. He had a close association with the Ku Klux Klan. He was quoted in their big movie. And you look at Lyndon Johnson. Lies have been written about Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson was a racist to the day he died. He never had an epiphany. But it's not just about that. This goes into the entire purpose of the Democrat Party. Listen to how these people talk. Obama, Michelle Obama. Listen to what they say. Bernie Sanders is a great Marxist, one of the leaders of the Democrat Party, AOC, and about 200 of other Marxists in the House of Representatives. 10 to 15% of the House, Democrats, are Marxists. And while they call themselves democratic socialists or something like that, every authoritarian, autocratic regime on the face of the earth uses the word democracy or people or reform to impose their iron-fisted will over the people. And you're seeing that now. And I wanted to focus very quickly on Chapter 4, which is language control and thought control. People scratch their heads about the change in the language and so forth. Lenin wrote about this, Stalin wrote extensively about it, that you must change the language to accommodate the party. And it is the party that you must have allegiance to, not the country. You could see it with Xi in Communist China. First, he's the chairman of the Communist Party. You have to take over the party in order to take over the country. Well, the Democrat Party today is on its own form of jihad to monopolize politics, the election system, to monopolize law enforcement, to monopolize the courts. It's loading up the courts as I speak with radical left-wing bomb throwers. The attack on the Constitution, we're going to have a battle over the budget again, and they're going to go back to the 14th Amendment and tell us that the 14th Amendment gives Joe Biden the power to eviscerate Congress's core function, to raise taxes, to spend, decisions on the debt, which of course it doesn't do any more than it allows states to take Donald Trump off the ballot. They hate the Bill of Rights. They hate the First Amendment and free speech and the free exercise of religion. 3 more pro-lifers who never lifted a finger to hurt anybody, people don't know this, on Friday were convicted and faced long prison sentences. Go back and read that memo that Merrick Garland put out about parents. They're very much focused on destroying any opposition, any contrary opinions. We've had censorship like we've never had before in this country, except during the Civil War. Absolutely unbelievable government censorship by the Biden regime in every single department, through every social platform. And the problem is, people vote for this. People vote for this because we have a state-run media. And as I said the other day, we don't have a free press. We have a press that's free to do what this press is doing, which is mouthpieces for, propagandists for a party that is autocratic, that doesn't play by the rules. When they lose elections, they have their massive fourth branch of government. This whole issue of a government shutdown is for what? It's to fund the massive bureaucracy and increase its number of personnel. The Democrat Party will shut down this government before it will accept any limits on this fourth branch of government, which has been not completely, but almost completely built by them to ensure that they have power even when they're not in office, even when they don't win elections. So I can only give you a little taste of this because, 5 minutes, 6 minutes is very fair, but that's what it is. And I want to encourage people. People need to be able to engage in this debate. They need to understand the history and the facts. And as we say, ideas have consequences. They certainly do. Marx knew they had consequences. Locke knew they had consequences. And we talk about a lot of stuff. But in the end, when you look at what's happening to this country, who's behind it? The Democrat Party supports every one of these efforts to kneecap this country. And they say they want to fundamentally transform it. Why don't we believe them? They are fundamentally transforming it. So we talk about a lot of issues. I do, you guys do. But we never mention who and what is behind it. The Democrat Party supports every single one of these movements that are aimed at taking down this country.
Indispensable work, Mark. I can't wait to read it. The Democrat Party Hates America, out on Tuesday. The exact opposite of what we read in every textbook we ever got about LBJ or FDR, a very different version. Can't wait to read this, Mark. And by the way, congratulations on 2 hours of Life, Liberty, and Levin. Now we have to compete with you on Saturday and Sunday. It's an impossible task. But you're the best.
Hey, we're a team, baby. I'll see you tonight. Thank you.
You got it.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.